Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Center for Disaster Philanthropy webinar, Flooding in Eastern Kentucky, How Funders Can Respond. My name is Sally Ray. I bring my nearly 30 years of experience working in the nonprofit world and a passion for community and social service to my role now as the Director of Domestic Funds at CDP. I oversee grant making for several domestic disaster funds, including the dollars raised in our Disaster Recovery Fund to support the flooding in Central Appalachia. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm coming to you today remotely from Houston, Texas. Some reminders before we get started. You can submit questions at any time using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we will answer them at the end of the panel presentation as we have time. If you're on Twitter, please use hashtag CDP4Recovery. That's CDP, the number 4 recovery, to share and join in the discussion. And don't forget, please follow us at Funds for Disaster. At the end of the webinar, there will be a short survey. Please complete this to help us improve our webinar offerings to better meet your needs. And finally, we are recording this webinar, and it will be available on our website and YouTube channel shortly after the webinar is complete. Live captioning is also available now via Zoom. Click on closed caption live transcript to access it. More accurate captions will be available in the recording. This webinar is co-sponsored by Charity Navigator, Council on Foundations, and Philanthropy Southeast. We thank them for their support. As we begin the webinar, CDP acknowledges that we are working from the stolen lands of the many original peoples. We recognize that Indigenous peoples have been displaced and disenfranchised from their land by the socioeconomic and cultural disaster of colonialism, as well as disasters. We acknowledged when the US was founded, there were exclusions and erasures of Indigenous knowledge about how to appropriately care for these lands, causing environmental destruction and degradation that has had a significant impact on disaster risk and on communities. We're committed to dismantling the ongoing legacies, systems, and structures of settler colonialism and white supremacy. We commit ourselves to understand where and how wealth accumulation has harmed people and the earth itself, and the complexities of philanthropy is connected to that truth. Despite centuries of theft, violence, and murder, this is still and always will be Indigenous land. Please join us and acknowledge the original peoples and their elders, past and present, as well as future generations. At the end of the webinar, we hope funders will have an overview of the funding impacts in Eastern Kentucky, Central Appalachia region, understand how to best support community organizations responding to the floods, and to learn about the long-term needs following the floods. To be clear, this is a climate disaster. It occurred on land that was hardened by drought, plus extensive amounts of rain in a short period that would have led to flooding anywhere and caused rivers to overtop and flood. And then the rain continued for days. But it's important to note the destruction caused by decades of coal mining as well. This didn't just remove coal from the mountains, it destroyed trees and other natural environmental protections and left tunnels and slurries that make landslides much more frequent. Despite the wealth generated by companies buy coal, there are extremely high levels of poverty here, over 30% in the impacted counties. Appalachia is, in many ways, has been historically neglected by the rest of the United States. This all occurred within a culture that also was rich with beauty, music, art, and heritage. The social capital and cultural assets of Appalachia cannot be overlooked. And I know our speakers will share some of those strengths with us. Statistically, there have been at least 37 deaths, including several children. First responders have carried out over 1,300 rescues and 1,000 wellness checks, which helped reduce the number of missing to minimal numbers. There is extensive displacement and destruction. Homes, most obviously, have been lost in the hundreds, but schools, health facilities, and cultural resources have also been destroyed or damaged. It's going to take years for Appalachia and Eastern Kentucky specifically to rebuild. As funders, I invite you to listen to our speakers, and then let's all step up to help. Now it's my honor to introduce our special guests. I'm looking forward to the information they'll share with us. Megan Rouse is the Executive Director of the Commonwealth Alliance Donor Table. A proud Kentuckian, Megan is passionate about building the capacity and strategic impact of coalitions and has coordinated the investment of millions of dollars to support the work of local grassroots leaders and homegrown people power throughout the Commonwealth. Megan cut her major giving teeth in the world of reproductive justice and later built the Development and Community Partnership Department that now supports Kentucky's largest youth civic education nonprofit. Laura Smith is the Chief Strategy Officer of the Foundation for Appalachian Kentucky, a non-traditional community foundation located in Hazard, Kentucky, where she directs regional grant-making and strategic initiatives. She is the co-founder and former executive director of the Appalachian Impact Fund, the first place-based social impact investment fund of its kind, also located at the Foundation for Appalachian Kentucky. Prior to joining the foundation, Laura served as the network officer for Central Appalachia at the Mary Reynolds Babcock Foundation, where she directed the foundation's strategic grant-making and program-related investments in the region. Laura currently serves as the co-chair of the Appalachia Funders Network, AFN, a network of private and public sector funders focused on the shared goal of an equitable Appalachian economic transition. And last but not least, my colleague Carrie Cullen is the director of CDP's Midwest Early Recovery Fund. Previously, Carrie served as the Humanitarian Special Projects Team Lead at Lutheran Social Services of North Dakota, where she worked on disaster case management and recovery programming, served as project manager for the Midwest Consortium for Disaster Services, managed special events for New American Services, and initiated and led the agency's work with victims of labor trafficking. We welcome to each of you, and thank you so much for taking the time to share your expertise with all of us. We're honored that you're here. Carrie, let's start with you. The communities you work in are based along the Mississippi and Missouri watersheds, so certainly you're no stranger to flooding. I called you our rural and impoverished area flooding expert the other day. Are there differences between floods and other natural hazard disasters?
Yeah, thanks, Sally. I think when I think about this question, there's probably like three top things that come to mind when I think about the differences between floods and other natural disasters. And the top one is really, I would say all the time that floods are debilitating in a different way than other events are. This one, because it was a rapid event, it has a little bit different feel in some ways, similar to like a tornado or something that just is a sudden onset. But at the same time, floods will come in and destroy communities, will leave debris piles behind. Once those debris piles get picked up and things kind of look like the facade is back together, floods leave people with just a lot of different emotions and grieving, and a lot of times they end up being invisible. And so we can very quickly get the community to look okay on the outside, and yet see that people are suffering greatly on the inside, and those things are hidden and invisible. The second thing I would say is that one of the big differences we see for people is around insurance rates. So other natural disasters, there tends to be a higher percentage of people who have assistance and resources in the form of insurance in places. When it comes to floods, so typically I say, 95% of people after a wind event have some sort of insurance that's going to step in. 95% of people after a flood event have zero to no insurance. Well, zero and no is the same thing. So no insurance to help them in recovery. And the third piece is, I see this all the time, flooding, it just takes longer to recover. It is a slog in any natural disaster, any natural hazard event. It's a slog to recover. But for floods, for some reason, And we could point to all of those reasons, right? There's a lot of them. It just is going to take a long, long time. And so after a flood, I feel like I'm often the bearer of the bad news, that there is no quick, easy intervention or solution to this. And it's going to require the engagement of all kinds of resources in order to move it forward.
Thanks, Carrie. You're so right. Megan, let's go to you for some level setting. Tell me about the Kentucky and Central Appalachia regions that have flooded.
Yes. So, hello, everyone. Megan, Rouse, she, her pronouns. Thank you for allowing me to come. You know, the story of Kentucky, like you talked about early, is a tale, two tales. First is a story of divestment. You know, Kentucky has not been invested in our communities and our infrastructure at the level it needs to be. And so when we talk about recovery, we have to acknowledge that recovery in Kentucky is not good enough, because where we started at was already below the starting line. I mean, we're in a state where prior to this flood, nearly $2 billion in unfunded needs on our pavements and bridges. We already had over 200,000 people without access to broadband, which after the flooding has now grown exponentially, as well as an electrical grid system that has obviously shown its cracks and weaknesses within the past few weeks. And so whenever we're talking about Kentucky, we have to acknowledge that Kentuckians are used to fighting for Kentuckians. And I think recently, especially in philanthropy, this word of mutual aid has become extremely popular. But to Kentuckians, that's just called helping your neighbor. And that's just what we're used to. Mutual aid is how we help our people here. And that's why the second story really of Kentucky is resiliency. And why whenever we talk about helping Kentuckians get back on their feet, but then also get better than they were before, we have to look to Kentuckians in this instance to lead and tell us how to do it in the best way possible.
I love that local focus. Yes, definitely, Megan. That's we shout that from the rooftops ourselves. Laura, let's turn to you now. You're based in Hazard, so I know you're at the heart of it all. We witnessed that the other day when we were chatting with you. Tell us what you're seeing and hearing.
Hi, everybody. Laura Smith, she, her pronouns, and I'm calling in from our office in Hazard, Kentucky. If it gets a little loud outside, it's because we just had a group of volunteers come in, so I apologize for the noise. But you know, it's just incredibly heartbreaking and overwhelming. If I have tears running down my face, they just come sometimes as we're doing this work. I had a friend call me last night to check in on me. And I said, you know, I'm both exhausted and overwhelmed and so sad, but I'm also seeing the best in people. And he said, how wonderful to live in the place of the both and. And that is definitely where we are living right now. I think every person on our staff, every volunteer, every person that we are touching out in community are living in that place of both being astounded by how fragile and how strong we are as a place and as a people.
Sorry, I was writing that down. How wonderful to live in the place of the both and. To follow up, Laura, what are the needs you're already identifying or anticipating based on the demographics and the geography?
Yeah, so, you know, we have a strategy that's moving now where we are right in this moment assessing and getting to work with immediate needs. Those are the shelter, clothing, food that people have right now. We've had volunteers out all week canvassing, filling out applications with people who are in shelters, who have lost everything and have been directly getting folks money in their hand right now. That's what we call in our office the I believe in you money. You know, people are traumatized. We have 2 MSWs on our staff who are also doing trauma-informed care trainings for all of our volunteers. So a lot of what we are doing right now are listening to people's stories, being there for them, sitting with them, and then getting that important cash in their hands right now so that they have something that feels like their own in this moment. Beyond that, we know that we're going to have to take care of our farmers, our small businesses, our nonprofits. We have funds going up for all 3 of those areas and are starting to move money next week to those targeted audiences that are doing, the direct service aid that our nonprofits are, and also anchoring our communities like our farmers and our small businesses are. And then we're looking at a set of intermediate, what we call intermediate needs. So we're looking at the systems that are in place that we have to address. Our school systems, our schools were supposed to open next week. They are not going to open next week. When you go into our schools, many of them have been destroyed or are being used as triage centers right now, where people are going to get resources and meals. So we know that we're going to have to work with broadband communication, those types of systems. And then we're looking at long-term recovery. We are here for the long haul, and that is going to take, federal intervention and really all of us in private philanthropy and public philanthropy chipping in to help.
Glad to know you're there for the long haul, CDP. That's our focus as well. Megan, this is one of the first high attention. There have been lots of low attention, but one of the first high attention catastrophic disasters in the US this year. One of the last was in December with the Western Kentucky tornadoes. What's the difference between the two disasters, and how do you anticipate needing to change your response plans, how you're working?
Yeah, so first of all, I want to be clear that, they're different, but they're still both heartbreaking. In December, we saw entire towns in Kentucky that were flattened. People were describing them as if they looked like military war zones. So Western Kentucky is very familiar with what it feels like in Eastern Kentucky at this moment. Different situations, similar feelings. The difference, though, I will say that I am seeing as someone who is, advising folks on their investing as well as helping to manage some funds, is that there's different infrastructure in both. When we look at Western Kentucky is a zone where we were a little bit more hands-on in filling in gaps and figuring out who were the trusted people in a lot of these isolated small towns where they may just have a church network or they may not have a community foundation that's in an hour reach of them. Luckily with Eastern Kentucky, even though it is a region that has a lot of poverty and, small businesses and farmers, it does have a lot of infrastructure in terms of organizing and a rich tradition of people who are taking care of their people there. And so as someone who works in the field of how do we move money in the most flexible way with the maximized impact, that is one reason why we're choosing to really take the lead from the people on the ground and simply ask, what do you need in this moment? Western Kentucky, we definitely had to take a much bigger approach. I will say, in retrospect of Western Kentucky, that relief, it also showed what you said earlier, is that the needs are changing consistently. In the beginning, it's that, okay, are people, do they have their tetanus shots? Do they have the food they need for today? Where are they going to sleep tonight? But then it evolves into, what's a permanent housing situation? How do we get them furniture into their homes? Do they have a fence to keep their livestock into their farms? Because that's not always covered by insurance. We're also seeing too in Eastern Kentucky, which is a little different than Western Kentucky, is there's a lot more privately owned land. And there's a lot of confusion right now. Can the government step in to fix certain bridges? Can they get loans? And there's just a lot of inventive philanthropy that's going to be required of us to figure out how to fill these gaps quickly, but also efficiently.
Yes, as an example, we're just now beginning to do some of our significant grant making to support the recovery from the tornadoes that happened in December, because our focus is on long-term recovery. So we know you're at different places right now for sure. Carrie, obviously Megan and Laura are still in the heart of relief and response, like we just talked about, and indeed still search and rescue even. What do you anticipate they and other funders need to think about in the next few months?
Yeah, I would just say, listening to the two of you in the conversation, I'm just going to repeat some of the things that you are already saying around what your communities need and what your areas need. And so perhaps I might take it from even just from an outsider perspective, coming into a community, wanting to assist and help from a distance. And just point that out one more time, is that to really rely on those local voices and to just take a beat and to listen really well. And for those of us who are at a distance, if I think that there's a time and a place to start to engage community, And right now is not that time and place. It's the time and place for us as outside funders right now is to engage those like Laura and Megan, who know those communities, who can be kind of those local connectors for us. I talked to a lot of emergency managers who are like, I can't take another phone call. I don't have time right now, right? So it's not, so we have to be careful with our community engagement. We've talked about this like urgency, right? We can't lose that sense of urgency, that sense that we need to do something quickly. But we also need to do that. We need to temper that or balance that with this idea that we need to do things holistically and with some strategy and some real deep thought involved in that. During those first months, we talk about early recovery as this kind of term and this period, which doesn't really have a good start and end date, but it's that time when the communities are coalition building, building together, kind of moving those things around. So to remember that that also takes time for groups to develop and form and start to think about what they're doing. And to think beyond, I would say to think beyond those individual needs, right? Right now, it's really, in some ways, easy to see what those individual needs are, to start to meet those individual needs. We need to start thinking in the first couple of months, like, how are we going to move beyond those checks that go to individual survivors and meeting that, and instead look at how can we come together again as these coalitions and these engagements of people to meet these bigger systemic and broader needs in communities. And then the last thing just right now is really to start to look for those gaps, right? So all of these resources are going to start to flow from the federal government to the states to the local, and all of these donations start to come. And those gaps will start to appear in what those are. And it's really time to start like tracking those and putting those together and kind of waiting until we see the gap where we as a funder really can fit in and meet a need that's there.
So you addressed the first few months. What about the next few years, Carrie?
Well, I think the first thing, top of my comes, is save some money for the next few years. Like, don't spend it all in the first couple months, and keep fundraising, like keep going after additional funds for these communities and for these places. You've talked about this, but don't forget those caregivers and those nonprofits who are on the ground every day. And they have been up until this point meeting people's needs. Now they have an overwhelming amount of needs. And they're going to continue to meet needs for people for months and years to come. So don't forget about them. Don't forget about the mental health and the psychosocial needs of people. I would say look for the chances and the opportunities to be a connector and to connect to others. And so part of what I feel like my role is in community as I help with the Early Recovery Fund is really to make sure that I am connecting those big resources that are out there to the local community and to be a conduit for that as much as possible, and to be open to doing that and to making introductions and having conversation and moving these things forward. And really think about as much as possible how you can be flexible in your funding, right? So some of us can give general operating support to a nonprofit. Others can't, maybe for various reasons, but even if you can't, you can be super flexible and understand what these two just said, that it's going to change over time, right? The needs today are going to be different from the needs a year from now. And if you can be flexible in the line items in the budget to say, hey, like, you thought you needed this, but you actually need this, go for it. Like, spend the money in that way, be flexible and open to that. And then one of the things as a funder that I love to do as well is to, as much as a community needs or allows it, to walk alongside them, to be that support, to be the shoulder they can cry on, the person they can call and vent about the system and how the recovery system just doesn't work very well, and how do you do this and where does that go? So be willing to offer support beyond money, and whether it's emotional support or technical support, capacity building, whatever that is, be willing to step in and do that for the long haul. And again, we said it a couple times, but this is going to be a long-term recovery, and so we can't one and done it. We can't give and then walk away. We have to sit and be in relationship. It's not a transaction, it's a relationship, as much as we can make it with these communities, with the local funders, with the nonprofits, in all of those ways.
I learn something every time you speak. She is an amazing connector, and ally, and advocate for our grantee partners. And I want to be Carrie when I grow up, just so you know. Megan and Laura, a question for the two of you now. What do you want funders on our call today to know? How can they best support the affected people and communities? And Laura, let's go ahead and start with you.
Sure. Well, two things, cash and access. We need money. We need money on the ground, right? And just as Carrie was saying right now, but also this is a long-term work. So we need resources. We need access to the networks and the expertise that you have. I love, Carrie, that you brought up just taking care of people's mental health. We're actually putting together a network right now of mental health providers who are helping with the volunteers and nonprofit staff people who are out there doing this work every day to care for our people. So, you know, the relationships that you guys bring are so valuable, as are those financial resources.
Megan?
Definitely. I would just say the number one thing that I always recommend folks to do is to be okay being uncomfortable sometimes. Obviously, don't give to somewhere where you think you're going to have a fraudulent experience. We never recommend that. But, you know, the things that people are asking for, believe them the first time they say they need it. And sometimes the aid may look like aid that we're not generally used to seeing. I know in Western Kentucky, we've evolved to using some of the aid to put a staff person on the ground who can just be a point person for people who need support. And that was after a few months of talking to people on the ground about what is it you need in the long term, and they communicated they needed coordination. And so that's what we were there to support them. And that's not something that's traditionally funded, and it's something that's going to keep coming up as the months progress and progress. I agree with Carrie, you know, talk to people who you trust who are in the area. I'll tell you this, Kentuckians are not known for lying, or not known for holding our tongue when we have an opinion. So we'll tell you what exactly it is we think needs to happen in our state.
I find that happens in a lot of places, but
Yeah.
certainly I have discovered that in Kentucky for sure. We've received several questions in advance now, so we'll be working through that list, as well as any that you're posting and that we receive in the question and answer box at the bottom of your screen. You can click there and put your question in. As a reminder, CDP webinars are aimed at providing education for the philanthropic community. So while all are welcome to pose a question, we're first going to focus on those addressing funder issues. So I'm going to start first with a question to Carrie. Carrie, how does the flooding in St. Louis that we've recently seen compare? And will it also be a focus of our fund, or how will CDP be addressing that?
Yeah, so I would say that the flooding in St. Louis would fit into our low attention category. So I work primarily in the Midwest and 10-state region, and most of the disasters that happen in that region are ones that never make a headline and often don't receive any sort of federal assistance. So really the difference there, as far as like the individual disaster payments to homes and families. So the difference there really is around, they don't have perhaps the immediate rush of donations and things, but there are still individuals and families and community suffering. And there's still a group of people that are on the ground right now working really hard to do and to stabilize those individuals and those households. And the needs will be similar carried forward. So for CDP, as we address that, it's the Midwest Early Recovery Fund is looking into ways that we can do that and help and to meet some of those gaps that are needed in that area. And we do some of those things, just like you were talking about, Megan, like help communities hire a recovery coordinator or disaster case manager or volunteer coordination and some of those pieces. So providing that thing. So if you're interested in the St. Louis floods and you have some ideas, like, again, I would love to have any conversations about St. Louis and about even that 10-state region around the Mississippi and Missouri watersheds and those low attention disasters and how we can meet those needs as well.
Great, thank you, Carrie. We had a question from Michael. I'm going to rephrase it just a tiny bit. A lot of government funding doesn't support non-citizens, but those folks have been long-term residents. How can funders support NGOs working with these populations? Who wants to take that one?
Megan, do you want to take it from, because I know that you guys did some of that work in Western Kentucky.
Yeah, so so Western Kentucky has a very large immigrant, refugee, as well as people who are not currently citizens or documented folks who are living in that region. The way that we chose to approach that is we gave funding to immigrant community centers, and we did a lot of intake conversations. We actually had local leaders who we would call and say, who do you trust? We actually knew some of our partners who are within our partner alliance did some light canvassing in the region to actually go out and find people, because we knew that there was going to be immigrants who especially avoided FEMA, avoided even the Red Cross, because they were afraid of what that might mean for them, whether or not, you know, they were in danger of anything. But my number one recommendation for that is look for the immigrant community centers. They're going to know where their people are. I would also recommend, sometimes there are even legal aid services that also are great places to find support in that way.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. Thank you, Megan. And I also want to lift up another community of people in our communities, and that's folks that are currently incarcerated that often get left out of these conversations. So we have a body of work at the Foundation for Appalachian Kentucky that we call community safety, but it's looking at incarceration in our region. And so we have a staff person who is monitoring all of that. We have a radio station in Whitesburg, Kentucky, out of Appalachia, WMMT. They have a wonderful program called Holler to the Hood. And oftentimes that's the only lifeline that folks who are incarcerated in prison have to the outside and to their friends and family. That radio station is now currently down. So they're trying to get it back up as quickly as possible. So there is that line of communication again. But we are looking at that population and looking at what the jails and prisons in our area, how they're moving folks and what's happening with those folks in our community that are currently incarcerated.
Okay, so we're seeing many people nationwide that want to help in Kentucky. I suspect foundations can play a pretty significant role in building visibility and helping identify local action options. It's something that we at CDP do. How can foundations geographically far away from the flooding become information conduits in their communities about viable Kentucky relief funds and organizations? How can you help us understand more?
Megan, do you take that first? Sorry, my internet.
No, you're fine. You're fine. So first of all, storytelling is huge. Simply talking about it with your peers is huge. I know that we have seen the most success when our foundation partners are actively talking to their friends who work at other foundations about the type of giving they're doing. Not being in silos and not being afraid to say, hey, have you tried this? Or have you looked into doing this type of effort, and sharing it in your storytelling newsletters as well. I know many of our partners, we've even provided opportunities for them to, you know, not in the immediate disaster recovery, but to jump on Zoom rooms with our activists in the region and the community organizers to have that one-on-one conversation with how their experience was. But we can't have that unless the foundation people are really talking to each other and really strategizing amongst each other how they're going to do this type of effort in conjunction.
Do you have more to add, Laura or Carrie?
I don't. Sorry, I'm hearing about every other word right now. We're having some connectivity issues. I'm sorry.
If you need to go off video, if that will help, perhaps we can do that. There you go. Okay, so we have one from Chris, who I know from a Harvey Fund grantee of ours. Chris wants to know if what you're foreseeing the biggest gaps in terms of your social service providers and nonprofit network might be in long-term recovery. And Megan, I'll go to you so that we can see if Laura can stabilize a little bit with her internet access.
Yeah, so the biggest gaps that we anticipate seeing, I mean, the big problem that is going to first come up is that the people who are most impacted by this are the people who are often left out of or fall through the cracks of disaster relief in the beginning. So these are the people who are going to have the hardest time accessing and jumping through the bureaucratic hoops that things like FEMA and that our government aid services provide. That doesn't mean that those services aren't important. It's just a reality on the ground. And so for us, it's about how are we going to be able to get assistance to those people in the most efficient way possible right here, right now, because we also know that they need aid in the immediate moment. Laura, I do want you to speak on this though, because I don't, is your internet working?
I think I can. Yeah. I agree with everything that you just said, Megan, and also just the capacity that we have to access, not just FEMA, but USDA rural development and the type of federal investment that is going to have to come in to do this large scale flood mitigation work. And we've done it before. We saw it in the 80s and 90s. We rerouted a river in Pikeville, Kentucky. We put up flood walls, but there are just major infrastructure projects that are going to have to be completed in our region to have this be a viable place to live. And right now, what we're working on is just building that community capacity at the municipal level to be able to access that type of federal funding. And our capacity right now is not great for that. And number one, and then number two, it's also doing that hearts and minds works with people on the ground, because I saw a question related to this, to not feel like things are being done to us, right? And so to make sure that those people that you're talking about, Megan, who are left out, who fall through the cracks, have a voice and have agency in these decisions that are going to be made about, new infrastructure, the built environments, what it's going to be like and look like and feel like to live here in the future.
Carrie, with your vast experience in situations like this, what do you typically see are the gaps and is missing in a situation like this?
I think right along with what you're saying, I think that it's the staffing and the capacity, it's the people in the way in which we can, like you're saying, deliver that aid. So it's the case managers that speak Spanish as their primary language, as opposed to bringing a translator in and along with them. It's the space to have those community gatherings where people can voice their concerns and feel like they're heard and they're listened to. It's there's always gaps in housing, and issues around housing will continue, especially right now in our, with the affordable housing crisis. And how do we do that? How do we make sure that our temporary solutions are permanent solutions for people and move them in that? There's always gaps in food. There's issues around economy and job loss and those pieces that we have to look at. There's health, and then there's children and education. And so all of those pieces, in order to do holistically, right, we have to pay attention to all of them. And I would say that we will see gaps in every single one of those areas and places. And so that's why it requires all of us to really come to the table together to have those conversations and to meet those gaps.
And I just want to mention that at CDP, we have gathered a list of funds and NGOs that are responding, and we can provide some advice to funders who are looking for connections and to understand really what exactly is going on the ground. We're here to help support that effort as well. So Michael also has another question. He was talking about some experience in Superstorm Sandy, and I can vouch for this being a situation in Houston and in the Houston area in Texas after Hurricane Harvey. Will there be, do you expect that there will be some interest in relocating people to other parts, safer parts of the state or safer parts of the region that are less likely to flood? Will there be government pushback? Will that be something that will happen? We actually helped fund complete relocations of neighborhoods, but that did require a significant amount of collaboration between the local, the state, and government, and then private funders. Do you think that this is something that's going to come about as an option to access more affordable housing? Laura?
I don't think about relocating people, and we are very rooted here. What I do see though are other options for housing. In a place like Grundy, Virginia, they actually just moved the town to higher elevation, to higher ground, and I think that we are going to see that type of projects. This past year, before the flooding started, the Appalachian Impact Fund at the Foundation for Appalachian Kentucky has funded and made a low interest loan and a catalytic grant to a program with Housing Development Alliance to build up near the airport in Perry County, and a whole new subdivision. So I think that we are going to have to think about housing differently, and think about climate resiliency and adaptability in that design, and in where we build new housing. We don't have enough affordable housing as it is right now. So it's an opportunity, as we do build new affordable and energy efficient housing, to do so in a way that takes flooding and other disasters into consideration.
Anything else to add, Megan or Carrie?
No, I just completely agree with Laura. I get nervous whenever we start talking about let's just move entire peoples, especially in Appalachia. I mean, the history, the connection to even folks who move away, it's a boomerang situation. You always somehow end back. So I think that it's really important for us to do a yes and approach. How do we help people, but also let them live their lives authentically and how they want to see themselves living?
Exactly. And to be clear, the project I was talking about didn't move them away from the area, it moved them to higher ground as well. So into safer places within the area to build a safer, more resilient home. But I agree, we have to be careful when we have those conversations. One of the things was mentioned earlier was the lack of, Carrie mentioned it, the lack of insurance frequently in flooding cases. We're going to see a major underinsured or uninsured funding gap here. Are there existing programs that you know of that are going to address the funding gap between what insurance covers and the cost of construction? Or is there something that funders can do to support that effort? And how can we be engaged and encourage funder involvement in that?
Yeah, that's going to be a major gap, and we already have examples of that. You can Google IGA in Isom, Kentucky. The IGA in Isom, Kentucky is, an anchor in that community. For those that don't know, an IGA, it's a grocery store, and it's owned by Gwen, who is an older Black woman. It's a successful business. They pay people a living wage that it's like $15 to $20 an hour there, employ a lot of people. It was destroyed by the flooding. Gwen found out the day after that she had every type of insurance except for flood insurance was not covered there. Talking to my colleague at Mountain Association here in our office, Les Roll, he was saying that they're right now working with her. She's a Mountain Association client. Mountain Association is one of our CDFIs. Probably has about $1 million in gap that she's going to have to find. That's going to come from philanthropic sources, right? We're going to have to help her put that capital stack together. So I think for funders that are interested, really lean on our CDFIs in the region, and we have some great ones. And Appalachian Impact Fund here at the foundation also does zero to low interest lending to look and see what type of capital is going to be needed. But that is going to be a major, major issue for many homeowners and small business owners.
Exactly. I mean, that's why people like Laura exist, to help answer that question, to make sure the funding gets where it needs to go.
Along with the earlier immigrant question, we also did we didn't talk about this, but is there any sovereign tribal land in Kentucky in that area? Or if so, is there any, if there is, are there plans to engage with that community and work with them as well?
We do not have sovereign tribal lands here, no.
Ooh, that was a quick answer. So we've talked a little bit about the needs for long-term support, and we know that's critical at CDP, and that's where our dollars are directed. But how would you recommend, Carrie, that we bottle this early passion, this enthusiasm right now to support Kentucky so that there's funding for the long-term work?
So I think that what we know is that enthusiasm is going to go away. And so one of the things I would say is don't stop funding now, like, and set it aside and raise as much as you can and have as much as you can ready to go. And so for those of us as outside funders, as much as we can give right now to organizations that we know that have a long-term vision, and say, hey, like, you have this and you have 4 years to spend it, or whatever it is, right? As flexible as we can be, as much as we can put what we have, and just capitalize on that enthusiasm, capitalize on that fundraising right now, and then give it to the local community and allow them to use it over the long haul. I think is one of those answers. I think the other place that we can play is to continue to bring it back up into the minds of people. So I think Megan and Laura, perhaps you are going to eventually be a little bit exhausted from continuing to raise your flag and saying, hey, we need help over here. Hey, we need this. Hey, we need this, like, help us. And so for those of us out here, we can raise some flags for you and to continue to say, hey, like, so let us share your stories. Let us share your successes. Let us be a part of that in sharing that to others, so that we don't forget that there's still ongoing needs there. It's really easy to forget when, you know, the next thing goes and our head swivels. So you know, yeah, those of us, we can remember, and we can continue to share those stories as much as possible.
Yes, I love that self-care reminder, Carrie. We all have to remind ourselves to take care of ourselves, because we're not good for anyone else if we are not good for ourselves, right? So
I will also just add, for long-term planning, sorry if I'm like jumping in where I shouldn't, but you know, one thing that we talk to a lot to our funders for our long-term rebuilding efforts that we've been doing is that it's also about really expanding our philanthropic imagination about what disaster relief can look like. And that out of this moment of real tragedy, unfortunately, we have an opportunity to create a better situation than we started with. It's going to be a lot of pain. There is a lot of heartbreak, but the hope is that, you know, we can take this moment in the long run and really acknowledge how we're all intersected, and all the issues that had been in these communities intersected to make this a bigger issue in the long run. And we can take it to change.
right, great. Laura Isabel from our friends at the Greater New Orleans Foundation wants to know, she mentioned that she's read an article about the possibility that surface mining exacerbates flooding, and we mentioned that in our opening as well. Have there been community conversations about this, and is there a plan to address it in the future?
Yes, absolutely. So that is a fact. That is true. And this has been a conversation happening for a very long time. I was a, organizer and communications associate with Kentuckians for the Commonwealth 20 plus years ago when I was a young person. And we were having that conversation then, right? So we know that the intersection of climate disaster and change with the ongoing long-term environmental degradation of the ecology here is increasing this flooding. So that is absolutely a conversation, and it's also being built into the conversation around recovery, rebuilding, resiliency, and what that means in a place like Eastern Kentucky.
Wonderful. And then, we talk about that a little bit, but Laura wants to know, are there specific geographic regions within Eastern Kentucky that were particularly hard hit, and where you've observed a gap in that existing response?
Yes, absolutely. So, I think from outside the region, all of Eastern Kentucky seems rural. But, inside, there are major towns and hubs. So like Hazard, where I'm at, there's a town here and there's capacity here. Yesterday, I took my daughter and we went out driving through Letcher County, and we went to Hemp Hill, we went to Neon, we went to Jenkins, we went to McRoberts, these little bitty towns that are outside of Whitesburg, where everybody knows because we have great groups like Apple Shop and Cane Kitchen there. But these smaller communities are not getting the same level of attention or support. And they are Blackie is another one in Letcher County. And we need to make sure that we are reaching out to them. And that's why it's so important to work with proximate leaders. So, if you're funding someone like an Apple Shop or a Cane Kitchen or us here in Hazard, we're going to know where those communities are and help push resources out to them.
Do you have any other suggestions or thoughts, Megan, or? No, okay.
No, I mean, I completely agree on just also knowing that the communities are most impacted. That's also something that changes also really quickly as well. I mean, people are resilient, but like we talked about earlier, there's going to be, in my opinion, a lot of PTSD across the board, especially with kids. And that's now a whole generation of Appalachian Kentuckians who are going to carry this with them. And so while that may not be an emergent need or a gap that we're seeing now, it's going to be a continuous one.
Yeah, we mentioned in our introduction a little bit about the assets of this area and the social capital, and to link back to that, I'd love to hear more about that and how Kentucky and Kentuckians are working to organize and advocate for one another and for this, and how you're using that social capital and those assets to do that.
Well, I think, you know, I'm a writer myself, and when the floods hit last week, Hyman Settlement School, the Appalachian Writers Workshop was happening there that week. So we had a group of writers and artists who were on campus watching, you know, the floodwaters rise. Some of them lost their cars, floated away. And it was amazing to see artists and culture workers and our tradition bearers spring into action to not only save the archives at Hyman Settlement School, it's the kind of capital of the Appalachian literary tradition, but also you had chefs there who just sprang into action, like Kristen Smith, who was the chef in residence for the week and started feeding people. And it's that type of resiliency that people, Eastern Kentuckians, have. We're creative. Many of us are artists in addition to whatever our, you know, day jobs are. And to watch people just spring into action like that, take ownership and work collectively together has just been astounding and beautiful. At Apple Shop, we've seen archivists come from all over the country to help save their archive of film and radio. So it's been astounding to see. But yeah, I think that the cultural resiliency that we have is one of our greatest assets here.
Yeah. And I will just say too that from the statewide perspective, I mean, in the past week, we've coordinated a couple phone banks where people from outside of Eastern Kentucky can do welfare checks, call people, see what they need, and then connect. And we're doing that in partnership across a wide network of nonprofits. It's a little tricky getting a lot of people into Eastern Kentucky as volunteers right now because there's not a lot of hotels for people to stay once they get there. And so we're really doing our best to figure out how can we tap into our statewide network to support this work. You know, we're hearing mayors and other towns across the state sending EMS trucks over, sending truckloads. I'm in Louisville, Kentucky, which is really the center metro area, and I've been invited, I think, to like 20 different fundraisers for Eastern Kentucky this weekend. I think everyone had to do a bourbon tasting for Eastern Kentucky, which is fine by me. But it's really been a recognition that we're all Kentuckians, we're all neighbors, and that we have to do our part to save each other.
Bourbon tasting, talk about using your assets, right? There you go. Sounds great. Another question we have is around data, and I'm going to own that I am a narrative and a story person. I'm not a data person. So, and my colleagues know that about me. But I do know that sometimes it's really important to tell that story, and when you use it appropriately to tell the story, it's critical. I know also in the early stages, the data is hard to come by. What kind of data do you think we need to know about, and how can we access that? And are there sources of data that we need to know about to help funders understand what's going on there?
Well, so one of the places that I really love, Kentucky Policy, is a great data source if you're looking for just sheer numbers in terms of investment in the area, what the reality is economically for people here in Kentucky. They're a local research arm that we love to partner with. I will say that we take the approach where we do not require our grantees to report back data. We've decided that as grantors, that's not something that is helping the situation. That doesn't mean that we don't follow up. It doesn't mean that we don't have them do storytelling with us months afterwards, but we really went and piloted that approach after the Western Kentucky tornadoes. And to be very frank, I had people on the phone with me who cried when I told them that, and who would just say, oh my gosh, I don't know, how did you find us? This is amazing, because all they wanted to do was the work. I do think that data is important. It does share a narrative, but I also think it's a really delicate balance that we as funders have to strike.
I so agree, but that's the storyteller side of me. And I know some people do require a little more data than maybe you and I do, Megan. So
I
that's
agree. And that's also something though that can be funded. You know, yesterday I sat in Kane Kitchen in Whitesburg and I asked them, how many meals are you doing every day? And they're not sitting there counting every plate that's going out, right? Because they've been cooking since last Wednesday night. And they said, well, I do know that we've had 35, sheet trays of meatloaf tonight, and then they can break it down from there. But if you had a person that was staffing that and you were paying for that and paying for that data, that would help all of us. We could aggregate all of that, but somebody has to pay for that.
Laura, that was exactly what I was going to say, is that we often fund that community assessment or that person on the ground who is going to collect that data so that is available to tell those stories to funders later. And I appreciate the, communities push back to me a lot and say, hey, I don't have that. And so as a funder, I have to be willing to say, okay, either I'm going to pay for it for you, or I'm just going to accept that you don't have that data and that's okay. And we can move on. I think the other piece about data, we always want to know, how many houses were damaged and how many, we want those hard, solid numbers, and those fluctuate and change. So as funders, we need to be willing to accept that, well, this is the estimate or the approximate number. I can't get you, down to the detail. And then, we have to figure out, and I say we as the collective disaster recovery systems, how we share that information better and collaborate around that data and information so that everybody has access to it. I have walked into so many communities who have received assistance and help from all kinds of organizations and entities who collected data and information about that community, and then they left nothing behind about what they did and how they did it and who they served. And so that is just, to me, unacceptable. So we need to figure out how to make sure that the communities have agency and ownership over the information about what happened to them and who was impacted in their community, instead of going in and extracting it and taking off and going to the next thing that we have to go on. So there, Sally, sorry, I got on my little soapbox for a second, but I'll get off.
I expected you would get on it. That's okay. I like your soapbox. But that is all the time we have for questions today. So you can find a lot of resources that can assist you on CDP's website. The issue insights provide an introductory look at disasters and responses, disaster profiles, provide regular information about the impact of a disaster and the needs of the community to inform philanthropy on how they can help. The Disaster Philanthropy Playbook is now hosted on our main site and provides numerous resources for those planning disaster funding. There's a monthly newsletter full of information and regular blogs, including our weekly What We're Watching blog that highlights disasters around the world. CDP's staff team is always available to provide guidance. And if you need more in-depth assistance, we also provide a variety of consulting services. You can find more information about our work at disasterphilanthropy.org. Our next webinar, please join us for that, is on August 11th at 2 p.m. It's called Beyond the Typical Grant, Alternative Ways to Fund Disasters, where we'll be covering some of the things we talked about today. In order to respect everyone's time and to keep this to an hour, which I may have already exceeded, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today's webinar. Thank you so much to our co-sponsors and to Carrie, Laura, and Megan for taking the time to share their insights with us. Megan and Laura, please know that our hearts are with you and all people in Kentucky and Central Appalachia impacted by the flooding. Please stay safe yourselves and take care of yourselves. Please take a moment to complete our post-webinar survey to let us know what you liked and what you would like to see in the future. It will pop up automatically when you exit here. And if you have questions or thoughts that were not addressed during today's webinar, you may email them to my colleague Tanya at tanya.gulliver-garcia@disasterphilanthropy.org. Thank you everyone for joining us and have a great afternoon.